Back on Maniac Marge. Back on Maniac Marge. So we're back on the build. And in this installment, we're going to talk about what I've gone through to get that motor set up right there. It's way more work than you could ever imagine. Along the way, I've made some mistakes. They're minor mistakes, but you know, one of the great things about this YouTube world is that you guys get to learn from my mistakes. It's fantastic. I just wanted to take a second, kind of interrupt the video here and just let you guys know that I appreciate everybody. I appreciate all the support. I appreciate everybody subscribing. I appreciate you guys liking. I appreciate the comments. Keep it up. We're growing the channel. We're going to grow. You're going to see the Racing Lyfe channel, the shop, everything grow as we get better, right? You're going to see us expand. You're going to see us with new projects. So I have no plans of giving up on the channel. So if you guys like, hey, if this is your first time to the channel, thanks for jumping in. Thanks for taking a look. Thanks for watching. As we're building these cars, if you guys see me doing something that is completely stupid, let me know in the comments, right? If you have built a car like this and you have an idea, let me know, because I don't know everything and I'm okay with that. And I'm willing to learn. We can learn from each other. It's the whole purpose of YouTube. It's the whole reason why I jump onto YouTube before I start any project, because I'm trying to make it as smooth as possible. Luckily for me, YouTube's been around a long time. There's a lot of content on building gassers, and made my life pretty easy. So again, thanks a lot for watching. I do appreciate the time, and like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Thanks. We're back on the project, and Maniac Marge is coming along. We've got that motor sitting in there. Everything's looking great. The headers, the placement, the engine placement, the rear end placement. In order to fabricate floor pans, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. We have to figure out the engine placement, which in turn turned into, we got to set the motor up so that my headers are going to work. And I made some mistakes there, and we'll talk about that. It also turned into, heck, if I'm going to place the motor, I got to place the rear end, because if I don't set the motor right, and I'm going to have all my suspension geometry be off. So anyways, so I had to, in order to do floor pans, I had to set the motor in, get the headers mocked up, get the front suspension mocked up, get the rear axle mocked up. It's turned into quite a bit of work. Anyways, let's go take a look. Okay, so here's the engine sitting in the car. Engine's it's a 350 small block Chevy. I got headers on. I had to actually fit those as well, get those all figured out. So to start this, and then this video is not considered to be a how-to. This is just a video documenting the steps that I took to try to figure out how to make floor pans. And it became what I would call a slippery slope. So first and foremost, when I started this project, I talked to you guys about dropping plumb bobs and lining things out on the floor and getting all that jazz figured out, because you need to know some dimensional information to be able to make decisions. So you can see right here, I have got a center line drawn on the floor of where the factory rear end was set at. So that's the center line of the hub drawn on the floor. Okay, so if you look up here, I've got the center line of the front factory suspension. And you're going to notice a trend. So not only am I not going to follow the rules for the rear, I'm not going to follow the rules for the front either. I'm not going to follow the rules that General Motors said that they wanted things at, or the geometry that they wanted them set up as. Because, you know, I'm going to do my own thing, and I'm going to do it the gasser way. So first and foremost, to figure out that stuff, I had to figure out this stuff. So I basically, you know, I had my rear end here, and I don't know if I've done a video on the rear end. Maybe I haven't, but we will soon. We'll talk about that. It's ghetto fabulous. I would call it ghetto fabulous. So basically, what I had to do is I had to determine location for the rear end, the angle of the rear end. Then I had to figure out the location of the front suspension, which just so you guys know, this is all mocked up. This is clamps, clamped on, clamping, everything together. There is not a single weld or bolt in any of this because I just need to get things figured out. I need some dimensions, dang it, dimensions. So I had to get the front suspension mocked up, figure out those locations. Then I had to set the motor in there, which all I did was clamp in a 2x3 tube and put some bolts through the front of the block and clamp the bolts down. And that's kind of how this thing's positioned. I then had to use my handy dandy angle finder and figure out the angle that the engine needs to be at, which in turn then tells me where the transmission's going to be at and the hole I need to cut through the firewall. So I've learned a lot over the last couple of weeks. Well, before we get into that, I want to talk about headers. So these headers I purchased off eBay. They're China's finest. They are stainless steel, 1 3/4 tubes. They have a 1/2 flange on the motor side and a 1/2 flange on the collector side. The headers themselves, they're not perfect. You can see there's a slight little dimple in that one, and there's some scuff marks and stuff, and they're not perfect. But they're pretty freaking good for $190. Let me tell you. Let me tell you something. $190 on eBay. These are not going to be available for very long. So if you guys are building these things, buy a set of these headers because let me tell you a story. It would have costed me in stainless steel about $600. Then I would have, in just materials, then I would have been responsible for providing quality welds on all the bends and figuring everything out, which I have. The last set of headers I built from scratch were for the naturally aspirated Conquest. And I had probably, that was 10 years ago, and I probably had $300 in those because I messed so much stuff up. And then when it was all said and done, they looked like ass. They looked like absolute garbage. And I was super depressed and disappointed because the amount of effort put into building a set of headers is tremendous. So now there's better headers out in the world. Absolutely, positively, without a question, there is. But they're about $1,000 these days. So these are $190 on eBay. They're 1 3/4. The downfall to them that I didn't like is that they have a 2.5 collector. No, they got a 3 collector. They got a 3 collector, but you can cut that off and weld on anything you want. That's just one weld. That's super easy. But hey, I'm super impressed with these things. I've got the China headers on my Conquest right now, twin turbo, and they've been fantastic. 1/2 flange, 1/2 flange. Take a look. And the quality is not bad. So you guys can find these things on eBay. You can probably find them on Amazon. I honestly think Speedway Motor sells them too, and they're the exact same thing, and Speedway sells them for like $600. They're probably the blems from the Speedway headers. They're probably the rejects. That's probably what these are. But anyways, $200, can't complain. They are freaking fantastic. Now, tip number 2. So headers in small block Chevy, 1 3/4. These will make all the power that you need. Tip number 2. When you're setting up a car, set it up around a set of headers. There's nothing worse than setting everything up and then your $1,000 custom built headers don't work. So I made some mistakes here. To get to my mistakes, we have to go down the path of all measurements. So bear with me, boys. Bear with me, gal. Bear with me. So in order to figure out the exact placement of this engine, you need to know your instance center line, which I think that's the right term for this. I don't know. But you can see down here, I made these things on the table. I just hand cut these brackets and I made them extra low because I wanted this suspension to work and I want it to work well. So what you want to do, these are, I think, are 32-inch long ladder bars. So I just measured it all out, 32 inches. I actually took a string and, I had that line on the floor, and that line is, not only does it figure out my center line, but it's also going to be my measuring point for the location of the ladder bars in relation to the final mounting location of the engine. So I ran a string from the ground right there all the way up, and I estimated it, and I brought it to the camshaft height. Now, there's different trains of thought. There's different thoughts on this. And some people go off of the front frame height. Some people go off the camshaft height. But I can tell you that the variance between the frame height and the camshaft height is minimal. So I think you could get her done by going off the frame height. But you kind of need to know stuff before you can estimate that. So I just knew that, hey, I'm going to put these frame rails in at the factory height, like the factory unibody height. I don't have that unibody in here anymore, but so I knew that, like that front section is set to the exact same height as what the factory unibody frame rails were at. Okay, so I knew that going into it. I knew I wanted to do that. I don't know. I just made a call on it, and I'm not sure if it's the right one or not. Well, to be determined. Okay, so I ran a string, which then provided me with the intersecting point. So if you go level off the right, and you got to be at right height, which I'm estimating right height, and I think I'm going to be right around this area. You go straight off the rear end, intersect with the string, and then that is instant center, I think is what they call it. But anyways, I might have that term wrong. I may want to add in something here, correcting my verbiage. But when you intersect that line with the ladder bars being level, right, that's ideal for drag racing, because what that's going to do is that's going to apply power to the ground, and the suspension's going to lift, which will then give you traction. So not only do you have all this weight of the car on the rear tire, you're also going to have the natural forces of the suspension working in your favor, and you're moving forward, you're projecting forward. So you're going to notice too, and I might insert some photos or something right about this time, but you're going to notice there's multiple holes there. And I did that because I wanted to be able to go against the rules of acceleration and traction, and I want to pull a wheelie. So I just figured it'd be kind of fun to have this car, dump the clutch, and hang the wheels. So when you're above the line, suspension is squatting. When you're below the line, I believe it's lifting, but it will lift differently. I don't know. I'm not an expert. We'll do that. We'll collect that data later on. But I know that I put what I did based upon the research I did is I took that line, ran it up, and I put my mounting point and intersected with it so that's level. Okay, now, again, 32-inch ladder bar. I believe it was 32 inches. Might be 31. But now, the engine. So the location of the motor, I estimated that. I estimated the suspension. What I learned is I did learn that I just don't like the way this looks. Do you see that gap between the front tire? And again, this is a little rusty. She's a little rusty, but if you drew an imaginary line and connected the dots here, well, there's a gap there. I don't like it. I just don't like the way it looks. So after doing some more research, a lot of guys back in the 60s moved that center line forward. The reason why they move the center line forward is because it gives you better weight distribution under acceleration. So it gives you it allows the weight to move where you need it to move easier with that center line forward, because you got more sprung weight off of the rear suspension, right? Which this car doesn't have a long trunk in it to begin with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move my center line forward 2 inches. Everything's moving forward. All I'm going to do is relocate the cross member. It's not ideal for the geometry but it's going to be the best I can make it. And this is not a full-blown drag car. This is a street car. So I want it to look good, right? So I don't like the gap. I'm going to eliminate the gap, and I'm actually going to change the radius of that front wheel opening. So I think it's going to look pretty sweet. I'm very excited about that. So that's going to be a future installment. Talk more about that later. Now, in order for me to figure out the engine placement, I had to mock up the front suspension. You can see the line on the floor. That's the factory center line. You can see I'm ahead of that as well, because not only am I going to be moving the rear suspension forward, I'm also going to move the front suspension forward. So my research tells me that that a lot of guys back in the day would do that. So the way I set up my frame rails is that the angled upward portion of the frame rail was actually going to be the leaf spring, where the leaf spring rear perch or the rear mount perch. Yeah, I don't know. We could call it a perch, but where the rear leaf spring hanger bracket would mount. I since then have reloaded. Ignore all this. This is just clamped in and everything's just sitting here because I was just experimenting. But it's going to basically sit flush to the front side of that angle, which then pushes everything forward 2 inches. I had a fender on here. It's over there. I had the front valance kind of mocked up in there. I couldn't get it in there, but it's going to change. The wheel will not fit in the radius. It will not. It's going to be forward of it, but it's going to look bitchin', man. I look back through some old photos, and I've been watching a lot of nostalgic drag racing videos from the 60s, and you saw a ton of cars that did this. And you know what? I think it looks awesome. So it's going to look that way, but you know what that's going to do? That's going to put more weight that way. So you can see right here, center line, hub, then that is the engine motor mounts right there. So I just got this crossmember sitting in here right now because I'm figuring things out. But I'm going to push, and you can see, look at the gap. Look at the gap. And I got all the room, and I got plenty of room here. I'm not concerned about that. So I'm going to move this motor back 2 inches. This motor, I'm on the passenger side now. This motor is going to go back two more inches with the bell housing area will be through the firewall. So 2 inches, 2 inches forward, 2 inches forward on the rear axle. This thing's going to hang wheels, no problem. Even this thing's probably going to be like 420 horsepower-ish. Hopefully it'll be closer to 450 when it's all said and done. But with the manual, with an M21, I got an M21 for it, close ratio M21. So it's going to be cool. It's going to be unbelievable. So anyways, fun kind of facts, right? Like, okay, hey, my next video, I'm going to do floor pans. Holy crap, I got to figure out a lot of stuff. I got to figure out a lot of stuff to get these floor pans figured out, to get the floor pans made right. So next step for me is going to be I'm going to pull the motor out, pull the transmission out, and I'm going to cut the firewall a little more. Then I'm going to put it all back in again. I'm going to establish the crossmember location. And we'll talk about how I made that here in the next video or so. But I'm going to establish the crossmember location, get that all established, weld in some nuts in the frame rail, and I'll be good to go. Now, one last thought. I said it earlier in the video, I made some mistakes. My frame rail width out here is too wide. Steering's going to be fine. Everything else is going to be fine. But if I would have narrowed these things up to, right now I'm at like 31 inches from inside to inside. If I would have narrowed them up to like, let's say 27, let's just take a quick look. Ooh. Do you see the header? We got a horizontal plane and then it dips down at like a 30-degree angle. I had to notch my frame rail to get into clear. Now, it's not the end of the world, but if I would have just done this slightly different, I would have not had to have done that. So here's my tip to anybody who's watching, is if you're doing these frame rails, right, set them up at like a 27-inch width. Now, these frame rails are one piece. They run all the way back, and they tie into the frame rail. And it's good. They're going to be very structurally sound. Everything's good there. That's why I did it. And these are actually the same exact locations that they are on the factory frame rails. Second thing, you might say, well, why don't you just move the engine up? I don't want to, because I want to be able to put a hood on it if need be. Like, I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing with the project yet. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to end up, and I'm not sure what my combination is going to look like on top of that intake manifold. So right now, this height of this motor is exactly the same height of the stock motor, which is sitting over there. It's the exact same height. I could have moved it up, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep it where it was because I know that I got to work around a hood. I just didn't want it to look wonky. I know that where I'm at now, it's not gonna, and I can put a carburetor on it, distributor, all that jazz, and I can close the hood. Now, moving the motor up would probably help in a weight and balance scenario, or weight distribution under acceleration, yes. But again, I've never built one of these cars, so I wanted to just be certain that I'm not going to have a potential issue with locating it due to height and things like that. So if I would have built the frame rails 27 inches wide, I would have never had that issue. Also, I mocked up the steering. Steering would not have been an issue either with that width. So how would I have changed it? Which, who knows, maybe I still will, but frame rails come up to a full width cross member that goes from side to side, which this will be. It's just tied in here, then there'll be a separate one. Full width cross member, frame rail, narrower frame rails here that run out. So that's how I would have done that. Anyways, so now it isn't exactly a mistake. It's still, everything here is going to work just fine. Steering's going to work fine. I mean, I got good clearances there. Everything's good. I ran a 56-inch wide, 56? Yeah, 56-inch wide straight axle, Speedway straight axle. But I don't have any issues. I mean, I'm going to run some pizza cutters up front, things like that. But anywho, so frame rails could have been in a little bit narrower. Yeah, so that's the mistake they made. And it just would have made it a lot easier to build around this. Also, too, sometimes, some people are doing, if you have a straight axle and your engine placement, I don't know, you might have a different engine combination, but just be aware of that. I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware of that, and that just take a look at that. So you're trying to think through all this stuff, and sometimes things just don't work out.